First of all, thank you for joining. Also, the people from the organization to make this very beautiful conference possible. And also, we, Arend and myself, would like also from our university, from the Hogeschool, to be present and take part of the stage. So for that, we took a topic which is kind of about LLMs, so not using it, but actually looking at it. I will do a very quick brief introduction why we have started to do this. Arend has done the bulk of the work and will also do most of the presentation. And I will then quickly wrap up where we stand now and other fascinating stuff we try to do on our own, but in preference together with you. Now, that's what I kind of already said. So it's about a year ago now. I think it's end of November. It was, I think, the 30th of November. This kind of shocked the world, I guess in a positive sense. But if you look at the buildings where I live, it was also kind of looked at frightening. So I have this picture in the middle where we have this rabbit looking in the headlights. That was also kind of froze us. Not so much, I think, as technicians, but more in our role of an institution responsible for giving, in our case, Bachelor of Science, Master of Science degrees, where we also would like people to, for example, write properly reports, hopefully in good Dutch or English, for example. Those are also requirements for which we give degrees. And so also, let's say, the glass is half empty sentiment raised. And not only with us, usually Leuven, the Rijksuniversiteit, they all were, okay, what do we do with this? Now, the world moved on. OpenAI is moving very fast. But okay, we don't want to lag behind. So I apologize that it's in Dutch, but this is the official statement of the use of AI by our school in general, and not only our department, our school in general. It looks an intranet, but actually it's on an extranet, so this is public available information. And so I really like the idea that, yes, in a Dutch joke, het beleid is, gebruik het met beleid. So I think that's a kind of constructive approach. And also, the last one can be seen as a fruitful assistant for both staff and students. And I think we saw many examples today of how, for example, ChatGPT can be used. We do work ourselves in helping students to do work, solving research questions, but also staff, and some of my colleagues are here. Can these engines help, for example, to do the corrections? Can it help me to generate better courseware, etc.? But there's another page, and that's called fraud. Plagiarism, that's already not allowed, but it's also not allowed to ask your brother, your father, or your significant other to produce your final report. And that's where, of course, we see these type of tools coming as well. So the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools when it's not allowed, beleid is gebruiken met beleid, valt onder de definitie van fraude of fraud. And fraud is pretty serious. So with fraud, it can go to the exam committee and they can take away the right of your diploma. So it's not only a slap on your fingers, it can really influence your career. So this is significant and also for us important on how we do that. Now, that was one of the entry routes why we got to do this type of work. I give it now to Arend, because we were asked from our computer science background by the examination board, who has to make these final decisions on, do we actually claim fraud in this case or not, to help them. There is that technology out there to see if there is a suspicion, or if there is a suspicion of fraud, is there some kind of proof, or at least technology out there that can help us. That's a bit like in Dutch the flitspaal. It's in the end the Openbaar Ministerie who decides if you get a fine, but can we at least come up with kind of reliable tools to detect this? So, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So where do we start? We start at selecting the AI detection tools that we are going to test. So for this, we had one advantage, and that is that this question didn't start in June when we started working on this research, but it started a little before that. So the examination boards had already spread a formal or informal list to a few of the teachers that said, like, if you have any suspicion as to whether or not a student is using AI or not, then the top 5 in this list are tools you can use to check if that's a possibility. That does not mean that the decision will be made based on those tools, but that means that the teacher can use it to make a decision on informing the examination board about the student who did the work. We also added ChatGPT to this list because a few people were like, well, you can also use ChatGPT to detect whether it has written the text. So we added that to just have a bit more tools in there. So we have the tools. Now we need the data set. How do we get this data set? As an education institute, you would of course think that we would easily be able to get a few texts ourselves. Well, at the end of the year, that was a bit tricky because most students are either already done, so they don't look at their email anymore, or they are very busy with finishing up the year. So they also don't pay very close attention to their email anymore. And we need the permission from students to use the different essays they have written. So instead of asking students, we used the HBO Kennisbank to gather 40 reports from there. The HBO Kennisbank is a data bank that just contains a lot of student-written reports from schools throughout the Netherlands. All the texts we used are bachelor graduation reports to ensure that there's at least a high quality standard for the students that have written them. And it was also, of course, necessary that they were publicly available so we could actually use them, because there is a bit of a difference in the different licensing they have on there. It was also important that the reports were written between January 2020, so it's at least relatively recent information, and June 2022, so we can be sure that the reports are written without the use of AI like ChatGPT. And we wanted there to be a split of 20 English reports and 20 Dutch reports, because at the Hanse we have a split in the different courses for whether they are English or Dutch. So now we have the reports. We take these from 4 different domains to make sure that there's a spread of information in there. And the domains are displayed here. So that's construction and logistics, economics and management, ICT and media, recreation and sports, all relatively different subjects, right? So that means that we have a wide spread in information. Then we go to the testing of the tools. So we have these reports, but we want to make comparable samples that we can use to test the different tools. So what we do is we make 3 groups. We make one group, and that's human written text. One group, that's AI written text. And then a 3rd group, and that's the AI written text, but altered by a paraphraser tool, which will alter the text slightly and make it to where it would technically or supposedly be harder for the AI detection tool to detect if it was written by ChatGPT. The human written text were the summaries that were written by the authors of the different reports. Then we inserted the different reports into ChatGPT and asked it to summarize the report for us. So we could use that as a comparable sample to the human samples. And lastly, we use those samples, like I said before, in Quillbot to alter it with the paraphraser tool. This results in a total of 120 test samples, and all those test samples were fed through the detection tools. Now, I'm going to explain the confusion matrix real quick, because this is what we use to show the performance of the different tools. So a confusion matrix, some people will probably be familiar with it, especially if you've ever done anything in classification models. So in a confusion matrix, we have a matrix of the actual values and of the predicted values. So we can see what the true positives are. So that's the values that were positive to begin with and also predicted to be positive by the model. And we have the true negatives, which are the values that were actual negatives at the beginning and were also predicted by the models to not be negative. And then we have the false positives and false negatives. So those are the falsely identified or the wrongly identified samples. With all these values, we can calculate a few data points. So we can firstly calculate the recall and the precision. So these look at all the positive values, and these are very important later because we can use them to calculate the F measure. And we can also, of course, calculate accuracy, which is something that a lot of people who don't have experience with classification problems would probably want to use to look at how well a model performs. But in this case, we use the F measure because the F measure looks at more relevant data than just accuracy alone. So the F measure, you can see it on the board too, that's calculated using the recall and precision. And now I will show you the results we got. So in this table, you can see the F measure that the different tools got on the test samples that we inserted. So the left bar you see, in case you're colorblind, is the all samples bar. So that's the bar with the human samples, the ChatGPT generated samples, and the Quillbot generated samples. Then the right bar, the orange bar, is the bar that shows the human and Quillbot samples only. And that's because the Quillbot samples are a tougher data set. So I wanted to show you how well it performs on this tougher data set on its own. So we can see that most models don't get great performance. Mostly just CopyLeaks, which manages to get a 0.88 F measure on the toughest data set. Okay, so I'll show you the next slide. Maybe. Oh wait, no, I skipped one. So here we can see the English versus Dutch samples. So here I only use the Quillbot samples instead of the GPT samples, because that's the toughest data set. And we can see that CopyLeaks still has really good performance in Dutch. It goes down a little in English, but we can also see something else that's interesting. And that's GPT-0. It gets decent performance in English. And AI Detector Pro doesn't get very good performance, but still manages decent performance in Dutch. But what's interesting is that that model says that it does not know how to identify whether a Dutch text is generated by AI. So I don't know why it's so much better at identifying Dutch text than English text, but apparently they don't know how their model works. So we can clearly see that CopyLeaks is better than the other models. So what we did is we decided to do some more tests on CopyLeaks. For these tests, we inserted the English text into Quillbot again. And Quillbot has a higher setting for English that allows us to change the text more at the risk of losing some of the meaning of the text. So we took that option to see if that makes it harder for the model to detect whether it was written by AI or not. We also did another set where we took all the Quillbot samples again, and we also added a quote/reference to the text to try to trick it into thinking that, wait a minute, there's a quote in there, and ChatGPT can't quote, so that must mean that it's written by a human. Simple as that. Now, I will tell you one more thing. In October, we did a regression test, so we tested all the faults it did before again to see how much better it did. And the results show that it's gotten a lot better, because the left bar shows the results of June, and the right bar shows the results of October. And as you can see, the results of October are, for both data sets, above 0.95 F measure, which is a really good score. While the other are at least 0.1 below that. So we can see that while the new data sets in June scored a little lower than the first data sets did, we now also get really good performance on the new data sets. In conclusion, most AI detectors have poor performance as of June. We didn't test those again, so I can't tell you how they do now. But what I can tell you is that back then, the F measure of CopyLeaks was already pretty decent, with a 0.8 or higher. On the regression test, we got an even higher F measure where the F measure was always above 0.95, which is a big improvement since you're already at the higher spectrum. And then we have one more problem with this, and that is the samples that we use to test this. Because we use the reports written by the students, but the reports written by the students have also been summarized by ChatGPT. So that's, of course, a restriction that you have on ChatGPT, and most students would probably use ChatGPT for more than just summarizing something they've written, because summarizing is probably the least work in all of it. So they would probably also want to generate the entire text with it. So in the future, if we want to get a more clear sight on whether or not this research will hold up on larger test samples, we should look into AI texts that were entirely written by AI, so not just the summary. We should also look at AI texts that were rewritten by a human, so a human can ask AI, hey, how does this work? And then rewrite it themselves, but they still don't have to understand the text, of course. And we can also look at how well do other paraphrasing tools perform, because Quillbot, for example, is not a paraphrasing tool that's made specifically to trick these AI detection models. But right now, there are a lot of tools coming up that are made specifically to trick these tools. So it's also interesting, of course, to see how they will perform in those cases. Then I will now give the word back to Rix.
Indeed, indeed. We were very impressed. Of course, it was good that we had a winner, because otherwise, actually in the beginning I thought, impossible. So but okay, in that sense, a kind of copy leaks surprised us. We don't have shares, maybe we should have, but we don't. But okay, I want to give a little outside. I don't know how we do for time. 5 minutes. So this is fine. We can do regression test. We gave this as an official advice to back to the school, and it's publicly available. Like, okay, well, this looks like a winner if you are looking for these type of tools. But, and as we quoted there up there, of course, this introduction of these technologies, the fraud is kind of the negative thinking. It can also give a lot of benefits. In particular, the world that we operate in, we're in a school where we train software engineers, people that have to write, to do copywriting in a positive way, media, communication, journalists. Those are the people that we try to educate and bring to the market. So also for those studies, the introduction of these type of technologies will have impact. So inspired by the good work of Arend, we will do a couple of more exercises. Now, we got to know very well. So actually, we've taken up a second engagement to really on our own field. And like I said, we are very close to the software engineering department. So we want to take a look, how good are tools like Copilot, CodeLlama, JetGPT itself to help you with producing decent code. I don't call it programming, but I call it coding. Actually, we just had another presentation with somebody from their own experience. We want to do it a bit more broader. Scientific is maybe a big word, but at least we want to do an A/B type of testing. So one class with use of these tools, one without. And we focus currently on productivity. But as mentioned before, I come from a software quality background. So a next one could be, and what is then the quality of the software produced? I think we take Java and Python, I think, as the two testing languages. And we will also do a hackathon. So that's more for all of you, early gen. So that is then one way to look at, hey, how can these tools actually help us with producing code and potentially give us better advice on how we should restructure our programming classes. So that's for our own dog food, but we also want to help other people with their dog food. As I said, we are close to the colleagues that do the communication classes. There, for example, we have a minor journalism. Now, we see all the horrible images on television. So how to believe this whole thing about fake news. So besides text, there can also be a lot of manipulation with images. So also there, inspired of the work by Arend, we will do a step on how can we see, there are tools out there that claim that can find artificially generated images. Now let's see how well they do, or maybe play with or experiment with how well are watermarks doing to do that. So that's a kind of, again, I think we do it very bottom-up style of research comparable to what we've done on text. However, there was much more that we do on AI, and I think time is too short to take you through that. But people who saw the presentation of Bram, that's an example of an organization, a local star, that we would like to help to getting their infrastructure better. So that's an example of where we, as a research school, would try to help them. Now, what I said, we can talk about hours for this, but for time, I would like to skip. It was kind of my backup slide. So I think I want to give the word back to you, Chairman, to see if there are other people that would like to ask us something.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the great talk. Yes. Oh, wow. Okay. So many questions.
I mainly wanted to ask about like the false positive rate, because if I see 95% F measure, in my mind I don't really see how that exactly will translate to like false positives. But if you're saying 95% accuracy in terms of like false positives, that would mean that if you have 100 students graduating in a year, that you would get 5 people with a false claim of fraud, which of course would be pretty bad, of course. So yeah, curious how you look at that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can tell you, in the test we did in June, there was 1 false positive, right? From the 20, that was on the English text. No, now I need to think. No, that was in all the texts, by the way, because it's one of the false positives, so that's the same for all. So there was 1 false positive in all 40 human samples. And we redid the test in October, and we got 0 false positives now. So that's, of course, way better. But that 1 false positive is, of course, a good reason for the examination board to say, well, we can't use this to make the definitive decision on whether or not this was written by AI, right? So, yeah, that's a very good question. Very low false positive rate. You might see more false positives if we increase the size of the data set, of course. But because of the false positive we had in the past, currently it's not being used as a decision method.
One more very quick question. When you get the output, do you get like a percentage of confidence on the answer, or do you just get computer generated or human generated? Like, what's the answer like?
So most of the tools had both. The most challenging one to make a decision on what it was saying was ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is, of course, like, well, this could be written by me. For that, you can look at this, this, and this. But usually I would just say, well, if it's saying something like that, then it's wrong, right? So for most other cases, it would always say it's this. And sometimes it would also indicate a certainty percentage, right? So what's interesting with copy leaks is that it doesn't have the flipping point at 50%. So it's like, I believe, a 30% confidence that it's, or a 70% confidence that it's written by AI, and then it starts saying this is a text written by AI. So that's probably also why it has so few false positives.
Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, it's already turned to a different person.
So what's the precision that you would advise is high enough for this to be used to actually determine if someone has fraud? Do you advise the schools in this? Because you say this is the best tool, but do you think you will ever be able to reach a score that's high enough to state a student has committed fraud using a tool like this?
So in this case, we would have to reference the false positives again. So precision isn't enough of a metric for this, I think. But if we look at the false positives, if we have a model that would have like maybe 1 or 2 false positives on 300 samples, then I would be able to confidently say to the examination board, this is probably a good way to determine whether or not a student has written AI. But I would also never tell them to use that tool, partly because the use of such a tool isn't very reliable, because these technologies keep changing, right? So AI keeps getting better, which lowers the accuracy. Then the tools keep adjusting, to these AI, which means that maybe it's going to get more false positives now. So I would tell them to never use the decisions made by the tools as a definitive decision, but use it to determine whether or not students should be asked to, like, how do I say this, clarify their work for the examination board.
Yeah, I mean, we can take a bit of line. Oh, it's working hard. So, but in principle, there is already a suspicion, and then of course somebody could also somebody is always feels very bad. Personally, myself, I think you call it now dyslexic. So I'm not a good writer. So if I suddenly have a brand new text, then somebody help me. Could be Word or something like this. So it's more, and then we go as an institute in conversation with someone. It could also that their neighbor wrote the text. This is now a sexy topic for today, but yeah. So they want to have a bit more. Hey, this smells funny. Is there something that can confirm that we should invite the student for a looking in the eye conversation?
Yeah, for an indication.
Can I add one more quick thing to this?
Okay.
A recommendation I would give the examination board is look into changing the way that we grade work, right? So what I see right now, I started my last year, and I'm right now finishing up my subjects for the past period. And most teachers have decided to go for a form of grading that involves either a test, which means which is in such a setting that you cannot use AI during the test, or by just going into conversation with the students and seeing how much they understand the code they've written, right? Instead of just saying, make this exercise, send it to me. Oh no, I don't know if this is written by AI because I can't see them. So that would be my advice.
All right then, thank you very much once again. Now it's time for break, so you guys can go down and take some coffee. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. So the coffee is right here.